What are we covering in the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War, day 130? In the negotiation meeting between the heads of the CIA, Mossad, Egyptian intelligence, and Qatari delegates concluded today. They will reportedly continue for the next 2 or 3 days at lower levels. In the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, there was a seeming assassination attempt today in Sheikh Radwan of Gaza City. A car was reportedly hit by missiles and 4 to 6 people were reportedly killed. Israel and Lebanon are debating the French proposal for de-escalation. Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati stated today, things are progressing towards a long-term stability. But in addition to the State Department investigation, there are also other investigations going on within the U.S. administration regarding Israel's actions during the war. Hello everyone, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of February 13th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of February 14th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, the negotiation meeting between the heads of the CIA, Mossad, Egyptian intelligence, and Qatari delegates concluded today. They will reportedly continue for the next 2 or 3 days at lower levels, and there were conflicting reports regarding the success of the meeting today. Egypt reported that the meeting was positive, and AP and other sites later quoted sources stating that there were significant advances made towards a hostage deal in the meeting, yet both sides to the actual war, Israel and Hamas, were a lot less enthusiastic. In Israel, it was reported that the heads of the Mossad, the Shabak, and General Nitzan Alon, who is the IDF general in charge of hostages, presented to Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier in the day a new position paper for negotiations. However, Netanyahu rejected it, forbade them from actually presenting this at the meeting, and instead ordered the Israeli delegation to just listen to whatever proposals may come from the meeting. General Alon reportedly decided not to join the negotiation team, and there are no reports regarding what the Israeli delegation actually managed to put forward. Instead, they were in the position of just listening. In turn, on the Hamas side, Hussam Hamdan, who's a member of Hamas's political bureau, stated that it is too early to talk about where the negotiations are going. Reportedly, a delegation led by Halil al-Haya, who is Yahya Sinwar's deputy, is going to arrive in Cairo tomorrow in order to continue the negotiations. The 2 points of contention between the sides, as has been reported, relate to both the Palestinian prisoners who will be released, as well as to the ultimate ceasefire. The two sides don't agree on the formula of releasing Palestinian prisoners, i.e. how many Palestinian prisoners are going to be released for each Israeli hostage, as well as the order in which they will be released. In addition, the two sides don't agree on if the negotiations are going to conclude in an ultimate ceasefire and IDF withdrawal, that is Hamas's demand, or if they're going to simply be a truce, after which the war will resume, that is Israel's demand. Other news related to the hostages, and this time relating to the medical deal back in January. So, just as a reminder, back in January, the deal was that Israel was going to allow more medication and medical supplies to come into the Gaza Strip. In turn, it was going to supply Hamas with life-saving medications that are needed for 45 different hostages, and Hamas guaranteed they will be transferred to the hostages. Hamas never delivered any proof that it was actually transferred. After the rescue of 2 hostages at the beginning of the week, there were initial reports that the hostages did receive some additional medications recently, and that gave some indication that Hamas may have actually delivered the medications to the hostages. However, since then, these statements were contradicted by the family members of those hostages. They say that they did not actually receive any medications in the recent history, and thus the situation is currently more unclear. In addition to this, diplomatic sources say that the 2 rescued hostages were actually not among the 45 names of the hostages who were on the list who required life-saving medications, and thus they were not supposed to receive any medications from Hamas. Later, other sources stated that Luis Har, one of the hostages who was released, was in fact on the initial list. However, it is unclear if he was in the final list. All of this is saying is that it is currently unclear if Hamas has actually lived up to its end of the deal. Qatar was supposed to supply proof that Hamas lived up to its end of a deal. It never did, and thus currently it is still unknown. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there was a barrage of rockets sent from the Gaza Strip targeting the areas surrounding the Gaza Strip, specifically Netiv HaSara today. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, there was a seeming assassination attempt today in Sheikh Radwan of Gaza City. A car was reportedly hit by missiles, and 4 to 6 people were reportedly killed. At this point, it is unconfirmed who the target of the assassination attempt was, or if that assassination was successful. Other bombings in the north were reported throughout Gaza City, including in the western areas and specifically in the neighborhood of Zaytun. In the southern part of the Gaza Strip, in Khan Yunis, that is where the bulk of the fighting is currently going on, intensive fighting was reported in the Abasan area, which is east of Khan Yunis. This is a region of several neighboring towns and farmland, with the most significant fighting reported in Abasan el-Saghira. Substantial weaponry was reportedly uncovered in that town, including warehouses with a lot of Hamas fighting gear as well, and a lot of gun battles were reported in the area. Al-Qassam brigades reported targeting troop transports and vehicles with mortar fire in Khan Yunis, unclear if this was in the Abasan area or not, as well as detonating 3 tunnel entrances as IDF soldiers were entering them. Mortars were also reported being fired against engineering and bulldozer units within Khan Yunis, and intensive gun battles were reported throughout the city. Other news from the Gaza Strip. The IDF released a video today that was recovered from the Hamas tunnels in Khan Yunis, showing Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, going through the tunnels back on October 10th. The video shows him going through the tunnels with his back to the tunnels. Reportedly, he's traveling there with his brother, one of his wives, and his children. The IDF put this out, specifically stating this is how Sinwar was hiding within the tunnels, while the other Gazans were exposed to IDF bombings above ground. Other news, the IDF spokesperson announced today that family members of top Hamas leaders, including Yahya Sinwar's family, have been arrested in Khan Yunis and are supplying intelligence information to the IDF in their investigations regarding the whereabouts of these different leaders. Others arrested include the father of Rafah Salameh, who is the Hamas commander of the Khan Yunis division, and the son of Husni Hamdan, who is another top Hamas figure. Other news related to the Gaza Strip, and specifically the impeding operation that may develop in Rafah. Al-Arabi al-Jadid quoted Egyptian sources today stating that Israel has decided to invade Rafah if the negotiations fail. This matches a report that came out yesterday that Egypt has informed Hamas that Hamas has 2 weeks to come to a deal, and if they do not come to that deal, Israel will in fact launch its ground invasion into Rafah. In addition to this, there are more reports today about Israel's proposal to Egypt to establish 15 tent cities, each housing 25,000 tents, as well as field hospitals as part of the evacuation of civilians from the town of Rafah. So what this relates to is the fact that Egypt is very concerned that an IDF invasion into Rafah is going to lead to a massive fleeing of Palestinians across the border into Egypt. So Israel is trying to assuage Egypt's concerns by saying this is how the plans are actually going to develop. Moreover, the report was that Israel is proposing that Egypt oversee the establishment of these 15 tent cities within the Gaza Strip, and that it will be funded by the United States and Gulf countries in the southwest parts of the Gaza Strip. Likely this refers to the Mawasi area. This is a refugee camp area north of Rafah, between Rafah and Deir al-Balah, where up until now has been the largest amount of refugees that are concentrated in addition to Rafah, since that is declared a quote-unquote safe zone. Related to this, the UN's Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OHCA, reported today that it has not received any communication from Israel about evacuating civilians in Rafah, adding that the organization will not participate in forced evacuations. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers are reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, leaving the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began at 232. 19 IDF soldiers are reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. The total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began is 1,346. The Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting 133 Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 28,473. 68,146 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. The IDF reported today that over 40 armed operatives from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad were killed in the areas of Khan Yunis and the central parts of the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, so that may be 40 out of those 133, or they may just be conflicting reports. It is unclear at this time. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, Israel is reportedly withholding a large shipment of flour from the United States that is destined for the Gaza Strip, stating that UNRWA will let it fall into Hamas's hands. Finance Minister in Israel, Bezalel Smotrich, has officially held up the shipment in customs, adding that this was done in coordination with Netanyahu, and stating that UNRWA is part of Hamas's war machine, and transferring flour to it is tantamount to transferring flour to terrorism. It was reported that a U.S. senior official stated that this stands in violation of Prime Minister Netanyahu's commitment to President Biden to allow flour to enter through the port of Ashdod and to get to the aid distribution in the Gaza Strip. In addition, this comes amidst more and more reports of increasing hunger and famine in the Gaza Strip, specifically in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, where aid operations cannot easily be deployed. Other news related to the humanitarian situation, Minister of National Security in Israel, Itamar Ben-Gvir, again appealed to Prime Minister Netanyahu today to stop the humanitarian aid flowing into the Gaza Strip, stating that the failure of Hamas to live up to the medical deal is another indication that humanitarian aid should be suspended until all hostages are released. Other news, there were reports today that the IDF officially ordered the evacuation of internally displaced people in the Nasser hospital in the western parts of Khan Yunis. The IDF reportedly did this using loudspeakers and sending Palestinians who were arrested into the hospital in order to order the evacuation. Some 8,000 internally displaced people are currently held up in the hospital. At this point, it is unclear if the IDF is stating this before storming the hospital, if this is part of the IDF's evacuating the western parts of Khan Yunis in general. Doctors Without Borders called on the IDF to ensure no harm is done to civilians or patients in the hospital or medical staff. Once again, there were no reports regarding how many aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, neither from the UN, nor the IDF, nor the Palestinian Red Crescent, so at this point, it is unknown. Moving on to the West Bank, there was a Palestinian attempted ramming attack in the Gush Etzion junction. A Palestinian tried to ram his car into civilians in the area. He was later caught and arrested. A knife was also found in the car. Regarding IDF activity in the last 24 hours, in yesterday's video I stated that there are initial reports of an operation going on in Jenin. Today it was reported that Omar Faid, who is one of the leaders of the al-Qassam brigades in the Jenin region of the West Bank, was arrested in this operation. Reportedly, substantial confrontations erupted during this operation. Several Palestinians and 2 IDF soldiers were reportedly injured. Other IDF activity was reported in the town of Kalkilia, where during an IDF operation, a Palestinian tried to carry out another ramming attack against soldiers. He was shot and killed. Other confrontations were reported in IDF activity in the areas of Hizmeh, where stun grenades and tear gas was also used. A total of 18 Palestinians were reported arrested in the West Bank in the last 24 hours. Other news: after the United States and the United Kingdom, France announced today that it is imposing sanctions on 28 Israeli settlers on charges of violence, and noting that the Israeli government has failed to live up to its commitments to actually rein in violent settlers in the West Bank. Reportedly, they will be denied entry to France in addition to other sanctions. France also announced that it supports EU imposing further sanctions on West Bank settlers who are involved in violence against Palestinians. In Israel, this is causing growing concern as the political establishment is starting to be worried that this trend is going to eventually lead to the imposing of sanctions against West Bank leaders and possibly even IDF soldiers and commanders for carrying out their military operations in the West Bank. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon. There were continuous rockets and missiles sent from Lebanon targeting northern parts of Israel today. Rockets targeted the areas of Hardov, Margaliot. There was also a barrage of rockets and anti-tank missiles towards the areas of Kiryat Shmona. 2 Israeli civilians were reportedly badly injured. Hezbollah also claimed responsibility for 9 different border incidents along the border with Israel. These usually involve gunfire against different IDF outposts. Today it was reported that mortars were fired as well. Regarding IDF activity, IDF reported that warplanes attacked Hezbollah military sites in the areas of Ramia and Rashia El Fouar, which were used as launching sites earlier in the day. Earlier rounds of attacks included military structures, lookout posts, and other Hezbollah infrastructure in the Hula village, Kilat Daba, Yarun, Misal Jabel, Yarin, and Sichin. Al-Manar also reported that IDF artillery fire was noted in the areas of Alma Sha'ab, Ad-Dahira, An-Nakora, and El Jabin. The IDF reported today that 9 Hezbollah operatives were killed by the IDF in these different attacks in the last 24 hours. Hezbollah made no such note of any operatives dying. Other news regarding the Israeli-Lebanese front: after it was reported yesterday that France delivered a written proposal for diplomatic resolution of the escalations between Israel and Hezbollah, this was delivered to Israel and Lebanon, several different Arab news sites today reported significant advances in the negotiations. According to additional reports, the 3-phase plan, which includes a 3-day de-escalation in which the armed organizations in Lebanon will withdraw 10 kilometers north, then the Lebanese army will deploy 15,000 Lebanese troops along the border, and then after 10 days there will be negotiations, or what is actually quoted, gradual negotiations over the border disputes and a roadmap to stop any further escalations. According to different reports, this was developed by France after the diplomatic missions of Amos Hochstein to the region, and is currently being reviewed by both the government of Lebanon as well as the government of Israel. Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati stated today, "Things are progressing towards a long-term stability. We are seeking security, peace, and stability for the South." Importantly, he added, "We support the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701 and would like a plan to support our military capability." That's very important because UN Security Council Resolution 1701 does not just stipulate that Hezbollah will pull 10 kilometers north, it stipulates that Hezbollah will pull 30 kilometers north, all the way north of the Litani River. Possibly responding to this, the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, gave a speech today. He stated, and I quote, "There will be a ceasefire in Lebanon only after the end of aggression in Gaza. We are here to support Gaza and wear Israel down until it agrees to ceasefire in the Strip." He added, "For those toying with the idea of our withdrawal to the Litani River, the negotiators have already understood that it will be easier to bring the river to the border rather than bring Hezbollah to the river." From Nasrallah's speech today, we learned several things. First, we learned that Hezbollah is not agreeing to this deal. While Israel may agree to it and Lebanon may agree to it, Hezbollah has to be the one to withdraw, and thus far they are saying they're only going to stop the aggressions if and when the war comes to an end in the Gaza Strip. Importantly, in addition though, Nasrallah is stating that he sees his war as inherently linked to the war in Gaza. What that means is that as far as Hezbollah is concerned, again, if there will be a truce like there was in November, Hezbollah will adhere to the truce. Hezbollah was not part of the truce in November, but it also stopped the fire. If there will be a permanent ceasefire, Hezbollah is saying they will be willing to adhere to that ceasefire. Israel has said it's not willing to accept that unless there is some sort of resolution of the situation in the north. It remains to be seen what will actually happen with this diplomatic initiative. Moving on to some of the regional developments. In Syria, the Syrian Human Rights Observatory reported that explosions were heard in the Ain al-Amar area of Deir ez-Zor, later stating that pro-Iranian militias launched missiles against a U.S. base in the region. Hours later, the Voice of Capital Radio, which is another opposition outlet, stated that the U.S. carried out attacks against pro-Iranian militias in the region, and that 3 activists in the militias were killed, so it is unclear if what was initially reported the explosions were the U.S. attacks or if this was a U.S. retaliation. Meanwhile, in Yemen, the Houthi leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, stated today that no ships linked to Israel passed through the Gulf of Aden in the past week, calling this a real victory for the group. Moving on to some of the political and general trends of the last 24 hours, the U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller stated today that the United States is examining reports that Palestinian civilians were hurt by Israeli actions while Israel was using U.S.-provided weapons. According to the report, this is part of a process meant to ensure that U.S.-provided weapons are being used in compliance with international law and that the investigation is underway. In addition to this, Huffington Post reported that in addition to the State Department investigation, there are also other investigations going on within the U.S. administration regarding Israel's actions during the war. These include, according to the Huffington Post, the State Department investigation looking into if Israel's committing human rights abuses that violate U.S. law, an investigation in the National Security Council if Israel is violating international law, and an investigation of the Department of Defense in the United States assessing if Israeli actions in Gaza violate international law in a way that implicates the United States. Officially, the United States is saying that it has full assurances that Israel is living up to international law. However, according to different reports, it is launching all these investigations, meanwhile under the radar, in order to see what is actually going on and is the U.S. implicated in Israel's actions. Other political news. South Africa appealed to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, today, requesting that the court strengthen and issue new injunctions against Israel in light of Israel's intention to invade Rafah. Other news, Iranian foreign minister, after visiting Lebanon and Syria, arrived in Qatar. He reportedly met with Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas in Qatar, and discussed the latest developments, stating that any deal must include a complete ceasefire and IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Other news, a delegation of over 100 Israeli family members of hostages and family members of those who were killed on October 7th will arrive in The Hague tomorrow, submitting a lawsuit in the International Criminal Court, the ICC, of over 1,000 pages against the leaders of Hamas for crimes against humanity, abductions, sexual violence, torture, and other crimes. It is important to note that Israel does not recognize the ICC, and thus the lawsuit is being submitted as individuals. They hope that the International Court will issue arrest warrants against Hamas leaders, which will not only curtail Hamas activity, but will also apply more pressure on Hamas to possibly come to a hostage deal. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip, Israel's Ynet news outlet published a report today about brewing plans within Israel's war cabinet to conclude the war between April and June. The report suggests that the United States officials discussed this timeline with Israel and the Israeli war cabinet, which is split between ministers Gantz and Eisenkot on the one hand, who want to begin implementing IDF control in the Gaza Strip, which includes developing local civilian administration and also emphasizing bringing a hostage deal as soon as possible, and Prime Minister Netanyahu on the other, who wants to complete the Rafah advance before beginning implementation of any other facets in the Gaza Strip. The report adds that Netanyahu is very fearful that his government will fall if the Saudi initiative develops and Israel is forced to recognize a future Palestinian state, and hence his interest is in delaying that development of the Saudi deal as much as possible. Possibly this is why he is first pushing for the operation in Rafah and also has been using different stalling tactics in Israel's responses to the negotiations in order to forestall these developments until a later date, maybe when his government is more secure. Again, that is all speculation based on that report in Ynet. If you enjoy these summaries, please do remember to subscribe, give a like, turn on notifications. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. I will answer as many of them as I can. That is the report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.